Hey guys, so today I want to talk about something that I really don't think is discussed enough, which is the underlying technology related to the blockchain. What I've been really surprised about, and I was definitely a victim of this for a while myself, is that people are investing a lot of their money and putting a lot of their time into researching coins and researching platforms that they feel strongly about and they want to invest in, but nobody really understands what the blockchain is, or oftentimes newer people have a tendency to think that Bitcoin and the blockchain are interchangeable and the terms get used incorrectly. There's hundreds of articles and sources out there where you can go to get information to try to learn about what blockchain technologies are, but I personally found them really dense myself and it took me a long time to get through them. So I wanted to make a video that was concise but to the point, just to give an overview of what the blockchain is. So what is the blockchain anyways? Well, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies run on the blockchain, which is also referred to as a distributed ledger. These digital files anonymously record all of the transactions on that cryptocurrency's specific network, and then simultaneously they are allowed to be reviewed by the users. In that review process, there's a code that's specifically associated with that transaction, and it can be reviewed in the ledger. This means that no one can spend the coin twice in the same moment. So cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin only exist in a digital sense. And that can be kind of hard for people to understand. So the images that you see online when you search for with the coin with the big B on it and everything else, that's just kind of a placeholder of an image for people to put a picture to the name, basically. But there is no physical Bitcoin. You don't literally ever hold the coins in your hand, nor do you have them in your bank account. You do, however, have the power to send somebody Bitcoin or create a transaction, which is giving up ownership of coins to somebody else. Everything is stored on the public blockchain via transaction records on the distributed ledger. So where exactly is this chain located? Well, due to the nature of the cryptocurrencies and the idea that the ledger is publicly available to everyone, that being the major key piece, that chain's not located on any one computer. So the blockchain is actually managed and authenticated by thousands of nodes all over the network, which equates to thousands of computers all over the world. And all of these computers have a copy of the blockchain, which is another word for having a copy of all the transactions that have happened within the Bitcoin network or ecosystem. When someone new decides to run a node on the Bitcoin network, they must first download all of the transaction history up to that current point. Think of this in comparison as to going over your bank statements, only it would be going back years. By distributing copies of the network and access to the network all over these different nodes, the network can never just go down. It's supported and secured by all of these different parties that are involved. So what is a block then? Well, the Bitcoin network witnesses a great deal of transaction activity, and maintaining a record of these transactions keeps track of what was paid to and by whom. And all of those transactions that are recorded and then put into what is called a block. Let's compare banking transactions to blockchain network transactions. So a banking transaction would be something like the entire blockchain, whereas a single individual block would be a transaction that occurs over like an ATM. So in other words, the relationship of a block to a blockchain is one part to a whole. Each time a new block is created, it becomes part of the past, but also gives way to a new block on the blockchain. A completed block then becomes a permanent record of the transactions in the past, and the new transactions will then be recorded in the current one. This way the whole system works in a cycle and the data is always getting permanently stored. A block usually contains 4 parts of different information: a reference to the previous block, a summary of an included transaction, a timestamp, and proof of work that went into creating a secure block. These blocks are then strung together into a fluid chain that prevent any inconsistencies. And because anybody could create a block, we needed to come up with a way that we knew which blocks were to be trusted. By checking the blockchain and confirming transactions, the entire process is essentially self-regulated. Each transaction requires independent confirmations on the blockchain that are random to prove that the block is valid, meaning that all the computers on the network have to be in agreement for this block to be created. So what's to stop somebody from going back and editing existing blocks? Great question. Each block is securely encrypted, basically meaning that the block gets turned into gibberish, and at that point it's very, very difficult to break into it or figure out what the information is. And once it's on the blockchain, it's there forever. So what is mining and how does it play into all of this? Mining is validating a transaction on the blockchain. Anybody with a working knowledge of computer hardware could set up mining equipment and contribute to this ever-growing network that is Bitcoin. The process of validating a transaction is done through very, very difficult, complex algorithms, or essentially very hard math problems. Once the accuracy or the correctness has been validated, then the block gets added to the blockchain. So if you've heard the term mining, you're probably curious how somebody becomes a miner. And in order to mine Bitcoin in particular, you need to have very high-powered processing equipment. Because the mining is 24/7 and it's ongoing, these algorithms are never ending, and so these computers are constantly working. These algorithms become more complex and more difficult as time goes on, which requires more processing power the more Bitcoin is mined. That's largely what creates Bitcoin's scalability issues, but that's a topic for another video. When a transaction occurs on a network, let's say Bitcoin for example, the speed at which that transaction is validated is what dictates the reward to the miner, and the reward is a fraction of a Bitcoin. On to downsides. So the first one that I came up with was complexities, for obvious reasons. This YouTube was born out of a need for a little bit more user-friendly information. The uprising of cryptocurrencies has really ushered in an entirely new almost everything, but in particular vocabulary. There's so much discussion of tech-related things and very heavy topics. It all really sounds like gibberish if you don't have a handle on it, and it can be really hard to get into right off the bat. The next downside I want to touch on is transaction costs and network speeds. So referencing Bitcoin is a perfect example. It has really high transaction costs now, as being touted as nearly free and ridiculously fast for a very long time. There's only 1 megabyte of data allowed per block. So basically that means that there's only 1 megabyte of data allowed for every 10 minutes because that's how often a block is created. And in order to get into that block, you have to compete with other transactions from all over the world. As usual, I found another very useful analogy. So imagine that there's a city bus that only comes every 10 minutes, and it only has 12 seats on the bus. The seats go to the highest bidders, and if you're not willing to pay more than the other 800 people around you, then you won't be one of the 12 in those seats. Maybe you'll get lucky if you wait long enough, but you're still going to have to pay a lot. Another big downside is the 51% attack. You've probably heard of this or seen reference to it somewhere, but it's the most notable security flaw in the proof of work algorithm. This means if more than half the computers on the network decide to tell a lie, that lie will become a truth because they are the majority of the network. It's called a 51% attack for obvious reasons, and Satoshi did warn about it when he originally launched Bitcoin. For this reason, Bitcoin mining pools are monitored closely by the community, ensuring that no one unknowingly gains the majority of the network. There's other things I could get into related to SegWit and the 2x debate, but I think that's a little bit heavy for today, so I'm just going to stop here. As usual, thank you very much for watching. Thanks for stopping by. I mentioned in my last video that I changed my Telegram over to a Slack, so come in and say hi to us, and I hope everyone's enjoying those Bitcoin gains.